Alright, what's going on everyone? So today we're going to be attempting to solve this beginner front-end challenge over on Frontend Mentor, which is going to be this interactive rating component. Now, if you're unaware of what Frontend Mentor is, it's essentially a site that has a collection of all these different challenges that provide you with not only the designs, but they provide you with images, assets, and style guides, so that way you can focus less on actually designing these and just practice your web development skills. Alright. So the challenge we're going to be attempting here is a newbie challenge, and it's going to be building this interactive rating component. So if we take a look at, we can click on the actual image here, we can go into this carousel. So what we're going to be building is essentially this little form, which we can, I believe, select a rating of 1 through 5 and submit that. And then they give you some hover states here and a selected state. And then once we actually make our selection or submit it, then we get taken to this page here where it informs us our selection, what we picked, and then a little thank you message. And then we have a mobile design here as well. Now, I'll be attempting to solve this challenge using Vue since that's my preferred front-end framework, but you can use any framework that you might like, or you don't have to use a framework at all, and you can just use simple vanilla JavaScript. Okay, now to get started, what we want to do is we want to visit the challenge hub. So I have already started this challenge. If you haven't, then it should just say start challenge. And then once you do that, it'll take you right here to the challenge hub. And what we want to do is download the starting files, which is going to include the assets, the JPEG images of the design files, and a basic style guide. So let's go ahead and download this. Alright, now to save some time, what I've done is I've created a new bare bones Vue 3 project, and I've spun this project up using the local development server, and we have it running over here in the browser. Now inside of this folder we have our Vue application, and I also pasted in the starting files from Frontend Mentor. So within these starting files, we have a design folder, which is going to be all those JPEG images that we've seen in the carousel. So if we click on the desktop design, it's going to show us what it should look like on desktop. So we can reference these images here to build out the actual card inside of our Vue application. Okay, then beneath this we have an images folder which contains all the assets. So we have one for the star here, which is right here, and then we have something called illustration thank you, which I believe is right here on the thank you page. Is going to be this right here. And then if we close these up, then we have an index.html file, which I believe this is going to give us all the actual text that we need, so we don't have to type or write this out. And then we have a couple readmes, and then we have a style guide, which is going to give us all the information in relation to the style. So it kind of gives us the actual widths that the designs are created on for mobile and desktop, all of the colors, and then some stuff about the typography. Okay, now to get started, the best thing I think we can do is first off create some color variables for all of our colors here, and then also we want to import our font family, and maybe we can even set a default font size for our body of 15 pixels as well. So let's start off with the colors. So let's just copy all of these, and then let's go over to our Vue application, and we'll do this inside of app.vue since this is kind of the root of our Vue application, so we can assign all these colors here. So what I'm going to do for now is just copy and paste this in, and then let's create our root, and then our first color will be orange, if I can spell correctly. And then what we'll do is we'll set this equal to our orange color. So this might be a little tedious, so we'll do this, and then we can remove this one here. And then next what we're going to have is going to be our white, so we'll say white. And then we can just copy this like this. So this is going to be a little tedious. So I'm going to do this, and then I'll just speed this up. And all right, there we go. We now have all of our colors defined, so we can remove the rest of these colors that we pasted in. Now back inside of our style guide, what we also want to do is let's import our font family. So we want to go over to our browser, and we'll say Google Fonts, and then we'll select this here. And then the font we're looking for, I believe, is Overpass. So we can type in Overpass like this, and then we want the font weight of, I believe it said 400, and then we want 700. So we can copy this, and then I believe if we, let's see here, I think we click on this right here, and then we want to remove all these Rubik's ones as well. So we'll remove that, and then we'll use the import directive, so we can just copy this import directive here, and then back inside of app.vue, we can paste that above our root. And then what we want to do is we can copy the CSS row here for our font family, and right beneath our root we can add that. Actually, we want to do that as a global, so we'll say font family, and we'll set that to Overpass. And I believe now with that set, if we go back over to our application, it is now going to be using Overpass, so that's good. Now, the final thing that we can do is I believe it said that the body copy was 15 pixels. So what we can do is define our paragraph tag, and we can just give this a font size, and we'll set this to 15 pixels. All right, and I believe that's all we need to do here for setting up our project. So we have the font, the body, and then we also have our colors. So I think we should be good. Now, before we get started, let's just take a look at our design file again and kind of just go over what we think we need to do for this. So what I think we can do is we can open it here inside of VS Code, but I think we can also just drag it and open inside of a new browser as well. So let's open up that one, and let's also open up the, the desktop, thank you. And then let's also open up the mobile design as well. So we'll open up these three here. All right, so let's just close these out, and there we go. So if we take a look at this from a desktop perspective and a mobile perspective, there isn't really a lot we need to do for this, so we can just set a max width, I believe, on the actual modal itself, and then a width of 100%, so that way when we shrink it down, it should be responsive on a mobile device. Okay, now for this example and challenge, we probably don't necessarily need to create a separate component for this actual card itself. We could get away with having everything here inside of our home view, but to take advantage of how Vue works and its componentizing, I think it makes sense to create a separate component here for the actual card itself, and then we can import that card here inside of our home view. So let's go ahead and create a new component. So in our components folder, we'll select a new file, and we'll just call this interactive, did I spell that right? Active rating.view. And within here, we can use a extension I'm using for Vue called, I think, Vue VS Code snippets, and we can generate a Vue boilerplate here for our component. So we're going to select vbase-3-setup, and what this does is it generates our template, our script using the setup attribute, and also our style tag, but we aren't actually using SCSS, so let's remove this lang attribute. Okay, so let's begin to generate the markup we need for the card itself. So let's zoom in here to get a better view. So I think this div should act as the wrapper for the entire card itself, and then we should have a div for the card content. So inside of this div, let's create a new div, and we'll give this a class of card content. And then on the wrapper div, we'll just give us a class of card wrapper. All right, now inside of our card content, we're going to have all of this right here. So what we actually need to do is within our images, let's just let's copy this and let's paste it inside of our assets here, so that way we can access it inside of our project. So first off, we're going to have our image, and this will be located within the assets folder. Then our images, oops, let's go back up to here. We'll say our images, and then we have the icon star. So if we save that, we actually we're not going to see it because we have to import this component into our home view. So let's do that. Let's remove this, and we'll just say interactive rating like that, and it should automatically import that for us, and we should now see that here inside of our browser, so that's good. Let's go back here. So beneath the image, we're going to need to have our header, so we'll just say an H1. And we can say, well, actually, what we can also do is just go to our index.html, or sorry, the index inside of here, and just copy this text like that. And we'll paste that in. Then beneath that, we're going to have our paragraph tag. And let's go over to this again. We'll copy these, and then we'll paste it in there. Now, for these buttons, what I'm thinking, because if we go back to our design, I don't think I grabbed it, the active state one. As you can see here, we have to be able to select this, and it needs to keep that state when we select it. There's also a hover as well. I'm not sure which one's the hover and the selected. I think 4 might be the selected. So we need to have a way to tell the Vue application that we have selected one of these. So I think what we're going to end up doing is, instead of just hard coding the numbers out, I think we'll create an array. So I think my idea is to create an array. So we'll say const, and we'll just say rating numbers, and we'll set this equal to an array. This doesn't actually, this should be also a dynamic, so we need to make this reactive. So we'll say ref, that'll import that there, and this will be an array. Now what we'll do is we're going to have the rating. So this will be like, 1, and then we'll have a selected property like this. So we'll say selected, and we'll do true or something like that. And then we just want to copy this down. Let's see, we have 5, so 2, 3, 4, 5. We forgot our commas here to separate these objects. And what we want to do is just give this 2, 3, 4, and then 5. And then obviously we want to put these all to false because we want to have these unselected originally. And then what we can do is, using what is called the v-for loop, we can iterate over this array and output a number for each, or we can output one of these rating numbers for each, object we have inside of our array. And then we can set the value inside of there to our rating that we have defined here as a property. So let's do that. So we'll create a new div, and then we'll just call this ratings wrap, maybe, or something like that. And then inside of here, we're going to create a new div, and then we'll run a v-for loop on here. So what we'll do is say for each rating inside of our rating numbers like this, we want to output inside of this. We'll just say maybe a span for now, and we'll say rating dot rating, and that should work. And we should now have inside of here our 5 numbers. So I think that's what we're going to do, and we'll come back to this to, obviously work on our selected state, but for now that should work. And then lastly, we just want to create our button. So we'll say a button, and this should say submit like that, and there we go. All right, so I think that's all the markup we need. So the next thing we want to start working on is going to be actually styling this out. All right, so inside of our style sheet, let's begin to actually style out our card here. So as you can see right now, it looks like this. So I believe what we want to do, so let's actually just, shrink some of this up to be able to scroll back and forth quite easily. So what we want to do is, let's first target the card wrapper. And what we want to do is, we're going to set the height to take up the entire screen. So we'll say 100 VH, and we want to give it a background color. And I believe we want to use our var, and I think it's going to be the very dark blue. I think, yeah, that's what it looks like, okay? Now also what we want to do, as you can see here, we have this white border around the side. So to get rid of that, if we go back to our app.view, and in our global selector, we can just set like the margin to 0, the padding to 0, and also the box sizing to what is called border box. And I believe if we refresh, that should remove all that. Okay, so back inside of our component, we have this set up. So if we take a look again, now for the actual card itself, let's target that. So we'll say card content. Now I believe the background color for this is probably going to be the var that we have set. And I think it's going to be, what's other colors did we have? If we go back over to our app.view, I'm assuming that it's going to be this dark blue maybe, or the medium gray. So let's just kind of mess around with this. Now we could probably do this in other ways, but we'll just kind of test this out here to see how it looks. So we'll say dark blue and not that. We'll save it here. And I think that's about right. We'll just kind of go with that. Then for the color of all the text, we just want to set this to white, I think, and we can alter it if we need to. It looks like this text might be a little different, but everything else should be fine. So we'll just set that like that. And then next up, what we want to do, if we take a look, is we need to set a max width here for the card itself, and then we want to push it into the center. So how we can do that is, we have a few different ways to get it to the center. We could, use Flexbox or grid. So I think the easiest way, or the easiest approach to actually get things in the center now, is to just say display grid, and then use a property called place items, and we can do center like that. And I think that should center it in the middle, horizontally or vertically, and then horizontally as well, which is what we want. All right, so next up, what we want to do is we need to set a max width on this. So if we kind of just look at this, I have a few different ways we can, try to get a max width. So maybe about 500 pixels or 420. So we'll just maybe do that. So what we'll say on our card content is we can set a max width of, we'll do 420 pixels, and then we'll set a width of 100% like that. And what that's going to do is, if we get down to mobile screens here, so if we just inspect this, which it may look really horrible, as you can see, it's going to allow it to, go, it's going to allow it to be 420 pixels at a max and a width of 100%. So as we get down to smaller screen size, it's going to be, responsive when we, go really small. Okay. So we'll just close that out. And then let's move this over a little bit. I can't seem to close out these dev tools. There we go. Okay. So now that we have that, I think we also need to do some padding on here as well. So maybe we'll say around all the sides, we'll set a padding to maybe like 25 pixels, see how that looks. Let's go back over here. Maybe like 30 might be it. It doesn't have to be perfect because we don't really have a comp. We're just kind of going off our eye here. And I think that looks good. We'll maybe stick with that. And then we'll do a border radius around the corners, and maybe we'll do 20 pixels and we'll see how that looks. And I think that looks pretty good. We don't need to get it perfect, but we just kind of want to, get it close. Okay. Now around our star image, we have this background. So we might need to actually wrap the image in a div to be able to handle this. So maybe we'll say star, and then we'll just push this image inside of here. And then let's target our star. So what we want to do is we'll say star, and then we'll give this a like fixed height and width, I think is the best way to do it. So maybe we'll say a width of maybe 40 pixels, and then let's scroll down here to get this into the view. Then we'll say a height of 40 pixels as well. And to get into the center, we'll need to use like Flexbox. Or we probably could use grid again, but we'll just say flex, and then we'll say justify. Well, actually, let's just keep it consistent. I think grid should work for this as well. I usually don't use it for smaller items like this, but I think it should be fine. So we'll say grid, and then we'll do place items into the center, and I think that should, work. And let's give it a background color. And here's where I think it's going to be that var medium gray. So we'll say medium, is it gray like that? And I think, or maybe not, it's a little light. Maybe it's let's see what other colors we had inside of wrap.view. Is it going to be maybe the light gray? Might be the light gray. Let's try that instead. Let's put that in here. Still don't know what that is, unless it's I don't know what that would be. Is it the white? Might be the white. Let me try. No, that's actually just white. So I think maybe it's an opacity on it. Maybe we go back to let's do the medium gray. So taking a look at this, what I think we actually need to do is we might need to create a new variable and just taper down the opacity of our actual color. So what we can do is back in our app.view, we can, I think, take a copy of our medium gray, because I think that's a color it resembles the most. And then let's just call this like medium gray 2. And instead of like 54%, maybe let's just taper this down to like 20%. And I think that looks a lot better and hopefully should maybe match what we're going for here. Yeah, I think that looks decent. Let's give it a try. So back in our component, we'll say -2. And yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Or it looks, maybe let's try maybe like 25%, maybe a little bit darker, because right now it looks a little light. And let's refresh, and I think that should be good. I think I'm happy with that. Like I said, it doesn't need to be perfect, but we want to get it as close as possible. Okay, so then what we also want to do is we want to add a border radius, and we'll just say 50% to round it. And I think that's good, but I think we might actually bump this up to like 45 pixels and make it a little bit bigger. And yeah, I think that's good. So then beneath our star, we want to have a little margin between the star and the header. So we can do either a margin on the bottom of this or a margin top on our header. Let's just do margin on the bottom of most things. So we'll say margin bottom, and to be honest, that probably looks like 20 pixels perhaps. Let's just kind of eyeball it here. Maybe 25. It actually looks a little bit more. And yeah, I think that's good. And honestly, I think there might be a little bit more padding we need to have around the card content. So let's try like 35. And let's just kind of maybe like look at the text and see how it's lining up. So that's how I'm going to kind of judge it. And I think that looks pretty good. Maybe even make this 450. Maybe something just seems off with it. I think that looks good. And then again, I think let's just bump up the padding to maybe like 40 pixels like that. And I think that's good. We'll just kind of go with that. I think that's looking a lot better. So let's also, I don't know, this background even seems kind of off as well. I'm not really sure what's going on with the colors here they provided, but maybe it's just the image. But so beneath our header, we need to, I think, resize the header. It might be fine. Yeah, maybe we'll just bump it down a few pixels. So we'll say our H1 and we'll say font size. And I think right now let's try like 24 pixels. It might already be that small. Maybe we'll do 28. I think that's good. And then we'll do a margin on the bottom of here. We'll say margin on the bottom. And we'll kind of go back and maybe that's like 16 pixels perhaps, nothing crazy. Yeah, that should be good. Now for the actual stars here, what we want to do is something very similar to right here for giving it a fixed width and height. So we come back up to our actual wrap. We gave it a class of ratings wrap, and we'll say ratings wrap. And for this, we're just going to use flexbox. So we'll say display flex, and that should automatically put them into a row. Then we gave them a class of what? We didn't give them a class of anything. So maybe we'll say class rating. There we go. And then we'll target this. We'll say rating. And what we want to do is, I think they're probably about the same size as a star, so we can copy essentially everything because it looks like the same background as well. So we'll just copy all this here and we'll paste it in like that. And let's see how that looks. So there we go. See, it does look, maybe if we add some spacing to it with a gap property as well, it'll do like 16 pixels to space those out and see how that looks. Yeah, still looks a little off. Maybe we'll do 50. Here, just kind of mess around with this a little bit. The spacing, I think, is definitely fine between the two. It's just not filling up. And, honestly, we probably could, instead of doing, we could probably say justify content and maybe space between, or, yeah, space between. I think that looks good. And we can also add a gap in there, too, for whatever reason. If it, gets a little small, there's still some spacing in there. And then what we can also say is do a flex wrap and set this to wrap, because I think what will happen is if we get to a small screen where it can't fit, those should wrap to the next line like that. And then, that's fine. We don't need to get crazy with it. So I think that's good. All right. And then for the actual paragraph, so we should probably target the paragraph as well. I actually completely missed that. So I think the text is, we'll try the color and we'll say var. And we'll do our medium gray like that, and we'll see how that looks. Definitely not. Let's try the 2. Definitely not that one either. Let's try our light gray, and I like that. I think that looks good. And then we probably want to do some line height, and maybe say like 1.2. No, 3, 5. I'm not gonna really go with line height. Maybe 1.8. This is kind of space it out a little bit like it does in there. Probably 1.6 would be good there. All right. And then beneath our paragraph, that looks like a decent spacing. So we'll say a margin on the bottom, and we'll just do like 30 pixels, see how that looks. And yeah, I think that looks good. And then for the space between our button and our rating, we'll just give it a margin on the bottom as well. That looks more, say, margin on the bottom. And we'll just do like 16 pixels perhaps, see how that looks. It's kind of hard to tell. We haven't styled our button yet, but maybe we'll try 20 for now. Okay. So lastly here, we just want to style up the button. So we'll target our button, and then let's give it some padding on the top and bottom. I'm going to probably say 4 pixels, and we don't really need to worry about the padding on left and right. So we can just say 4 pixels all around. And then I believe to get it to span the full width, we can just say width 100% like that. And then maybe actually a little bit more padding. We'll say maybe 8. And then we'll say border radius, and we'll do maybe 20 pixels like that. We'll set a border to none. And then the background color is going to be our orange. So we can say var orange like that. And it didn't autofill for me for some reason. So orange, there we go. And then what you want to say our color is white. And I think something's looking a little off between the spacing there, so it may need to be a little bit more. So we had a margin on the bottom here of 20. Let's just do 30 like that. And definitely need to add some more padding. So maybe we'll do like 12 there, maybe even 16. No, I think 12 was good. And then we also, I believe, have to have the font be all caps. So we'll say text transform, and we'll say uppercase like that, and give it a little bit bigger font size. So maybe we'll say 16 pixels. And yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. Now, one thing that looks a little weird is these numbers don't seem to be completely centered in the middle there, which I'm not really sure why they wouldn't be, but I think that's fine for what we have so far. So we take a look. I think everything is looking pretty good. It's not 100%, but I think it has to do with the image as well. So we'll just kind of disregard that. So now that we essentially have this, we want to start adding some of our hover states in our selected state. So for this, let's reference our design files, and we want to open up the active states. So we'll open this inside of the browser, and we can just zoom in on this. So for the actual rating button itself, the hover effect appears to be a orange background and white text, and the hover effect for the button appears to be the inverse with a white background and some orange text. Now, one thing I just realized is that I don't think the initial rating button should have a color of white, which if we go check, I believe they currently do. So I think it should be the same color as this paragraph tag. So we can just copy the color property and we can add it to our rating. And I think that is how it's supposed to actually look. It's not supposed to be white initially. Okay. So for the hover effect, we can target rating in a hover state. And what we want to do is we want to change the background color, and that's going to be our variable and our color of orange. And then we want to also update the text color. So we'll say color, and we'll use our var again. And we could just say white, but we already created one for white. So we'll just say white like that. And if we save that, we should now be able to hover over this and have our orange background and white text. And one thing we should also do is add a cursor and set that to pointer. Now, if we wanted to smooth this out a little bit, we could probably also add a transition here as well. So on the rating itself, we could say transition, and let's just do like 200 milliseconds. We'll do ease and set that to all. So now we hover over this. That should be a little bit more smoother when we are, hovering over it and leaving it. So I think that looks a little bit better than just having it change abruptly. All right. Now for the button itself, we also want to come down below the button. We'll target this in a hover state, and we could, add that transition as well. So we'll say transition, 200 milliseconds, ease, and set that to all. And what we want to do is we can just copy these. And actually the color should be orange like that. And then the text should just be white. So if we hover over that now, there we go. And again, we just want to add a cursor on here, and we'll set this to pointer. Now we also want to be able to select one of our ratings here of 1 through 5. And once we select one, we want to update the actual UI of it to look something like this here, where we have the background turn gray. Now, once we have a selection made and we click on submit to submit this form, then we're going to be taken to this thank you screen, and we need to keep track of the selection the user made because we're going to be displaying that here on the thank you page as well. So let's go back over to our application, and the first thing that we want to do is we just simply want to listen for a click here on one of our ratings. So let's go up to our actual div where we actually are outputting this, and we're using a v-for loop so we can easily do this. So let's collapse that as well. Now on our div with our class of rating, we just want to listen for a click. So we'll say at click, and we just want to run a function, and the function we're going to create is going to be called, we'll say select rating like that. So we can save this. And then let's define this function within our script. So we'll say function and select rating. Now we need to get a reference to which rating we're selecting. And the easiest way to do this, in my opinion, is with Vue, we can actually get reference to an index on that particular iteration that it's actually going over. So for example, if we just pass an index param here, for the very first one, the index is going to be 0, which we can then reference the first value of our array if we have chosen it, if that makes sense. So what we can do in our function is pass a param, and we can say index. So if we click the second one, the index should be 1, and therefore we can reference that specific rating within this function. So we can just say index, and then for example, if we were to say console.log, and we can reference our rating numbers array, and we want to say value, and then we can just pass the index param here. Now, I am actually using an extension called Console Ninja, and what this does is instead of having to go over to our browser, go to the inspect tools, and then open up our console, it's actually going to log out the value directly within this actual component itself, which is pretty handy. So now if I attempt to make a selection within the application, say we select number 4, we're going to be able to get reference to that specific rating. As you can see right here, the rating that was logged out was the number 4. All right, so let's remove this as we don't really need to console log this out. I just wanted to show you that. So what we want to do is we want to target that specific rating. So we'll say rating numbers dot value, then reference our index param to get reference to that specific rating. And then we want to target the property of selected, and we want to set this to true. And now that we're setting this property to true, what we can actually do is something called a dynamic class to add a class to our rating only if that property is set to true. So we can say class, and then what we want to do is we're going to add a class of, we'll call this selected rating, and we only want to apply this if the rating.selected property is true. So if we save this and then we actually copy this class and we go down to our style sheet and we create this class to actually style it differently. So let's go right beneath the hover, or right beneath the actual rating above the hover, and add this class. And what we want to do is we want to give it a background color, and we'll use our var. And I believe maybe we want the medium gray. And then we also, I believe, want to update the color. So we'll say color, and we'll change this to our var, and this will be the white. So now if we head over to the application and attempt to make a selection, say we select number 3, what's going to happen when we hover back off of it is that you can see it is now going to be selected because that property is set to true, and therefore this class of selected rating is being applied. Now, one issue that I think we're going to have with this is if we select a different rating, then that one's also going to be selected as well. So we only want to be able to select one rating at a time. So for this, there's a few different ways I think we could resolve this, but I think the easiest way to resolve it is to just loop over every single rating in our array and set that value to false. And then once that's done, we can set the one we have selected to true. And I think that should resolve our issue quite easily. So we'll say rating numbers dot value, and we'll say we don't need to reference the actual rating. We can actually use a for each method to loop over all of these, and we'll just give it a param of rating. And then what we can do is say rating dot selected and set this to false, and I think that should work. So now it has reset all of them. So if we select number 3 and then we select number 4, number 3 is going to be deselected and number 4 will now be selected. So it should work if we're selecting any different rating. So now that we have our UI state updated for whatever rating we select, we still need to keep track of the actual rating inside of a variable here within our component, because once we submit this form, we then need to display the actual rating the user has selected. So to do this, we're going to need to create a new variable. So we'll say selected rating, and we'll set this equal to a new ref, and the initial value can just be null. Now inside of our function, what we want to do is the selection that we made, we want to set equal to this ref here of selected rating. So we can say selected rating dot value is going to equal, and then we can just grab this ratings number dot value with the index param in there, and that should set this to the actual selected rating once we make our selection here inside of the application. So I guess just to test this, let's just do a console.log of selected rating.value. And now if we make a selection, then we should see that it's actually undefined. So rating numbers.value and then the index selected rating. Why is that actually null? Oh, we're actually referencing the function. So we need to say selected, and then we'll save that and we'll try this again, and there we go. Okay, so now we're able to keep track of the rating that the user has selected in this variable, and then once we submit our form, we can display that on the thank you page. And let's also remove this console.log as we're not going to need that. So to handle the submission of the form is actually going to be quite easy, I think. So all we really need to do is, first off, we want to listen for a click on our submit button. And then I think we can just have a variable that's either going to be true or false. And if the form has not been submitted, then that value would be false. Therefore, we would show this UI. And if the form has been submitted, that value would be true. And then we can just show this, thank you UI. So that's my idea. So let's try that out. So what we'll need to do is create a new variable, and we'll call this is submit it, and we'll set this equal to a new ref with the initial value of null. And then what we'll want to do is we want to use what is called a vif directive, and we only want to show this div with this UI if the actual form has not been submitted. So we can say vif, and we'll do exclamation point is submitted. So this is only going to show if that value is false, which currently it is, so we're going to see it. And then what we want to do is create a simple function that's going to just toggle this value to true once we click on our submit button. So we'll say function, and we'll say submit form, and inside of here we'll just say is submitted dot value is going to equal true. All right, and then on the button we can listen for a click, and then we can just run this function. Okay, so I think that should do it. So let's make our selection and hit submit, and then we're no longer going to see that content. And then what we can do is just create our new markup for the thank you page to display once we have made our selection. So if we refresh here, we should then again see our form to make our selection for that rating. So let's begin to work on the markup for the UI for our thank you. So inside of our component, let's just collapse this div with the class of card content, and beneath this we'll create a div for the thank you UI. And to keep it consistent and easy, we'll just give it the same class of card content to keep that same styling. And what we want to add on here is what is called a velse directive, and what this is saying is if this value equates to true, then it's going to show this div. Otherwise it'll show this div, which in our case, once that value or this is not equating to true, that means we have submitted our form, and then we want to show the div with our thank you. So let's take a look at the thank you UI. So inside of this div, we want to start off with our image, and this will be found inside of the assets folder. And then we have our images, and then we have our illustration thank you. Now beneath this, we'll create a new div for the selection, and we'll just give us a class of selection. And inside of here, we can just use a span tag, and we can say you selected, and then we can reference our variable here of selected rating, which will contain the rating that the user has selected. So we can output that within here. So we'll say selected rating dot rating, because that's a property that contains the rating itself, and then we'll say out of 5 like this. And then beneath the rating, we want to have an H1, and this will say thank you. And for the paragraph text, we can just reference our starting files and grab that. So we can go to our index.html, and then we want to grab this snippet right here. So we can copy that, we can close out of here, minimize that, and then paste in our text. And that should be all the markup we need for our thank you. So let's give this a try. We might need to do some styling for this as well in our application. So now if we make a selection and click on submit, then we now see our thank you page with the selection we made, but obviously we need to do a little bit of styling here. So on this div that contains our layout for the thank you, I think it's also going to be a good idea to add an additional class on here, so that way we can target these items that reside in our thank you layout specifically and not have to worry about overwriting anything that we have here in our original layout where we're selecting our rating. So if we take a look at the design, it appears that everything within the card itself should be centered into the middle. So to do that, what I think we can do is target the thank you, which is the entire card, and we can set the display to flex. And if we save that, the initial default for flexbox is going to be a row. So we want to set the flex direction to a column. And then what we also want to do is align all the items to the center. So I believe it's just aligned items and the center. I always get this confused, but that is what we need to do. So that's going to push everything to the center. And I think that's pretty good. And then also what we can do is I think we can just add the text align here to everything and put that at the center as well. And that's going to center our paragraph text here as well. So for this image specifically, it looks like there's probably between 25 to 30 pixels of margin there. I've been pretty bad at gauging that. So let's just take a guess. So we'll say thank you, and we'll do the image. So we're targeting this specifically because remember, we do have 2 images. So if we just target the image tag, then you know that might cause some problems. So we'll say margin on the bottom, and let's start off with 25 pixels and kind of see how that looks. And let's actually see, let's push this one over here. Yeah, it might be more like 30, so let's just start off with 30 there. And yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Now for the actual selected tag itself, it looks like it has that background that our star had. So let's do that. So we can target the, we can just target this as a selection. So we'll say selection. And within here, let's start off by changing the font color, which is going to be our variable we have of orange. And then for the background color on this, it's going to be the same thing we had for our star. So that'll be the variable we defined of medium gray 2. And let's take a look here. So I've been pretty bad at guessing the padding here, but if I had to guess, that's probably 12 to 16 on the left and right, and probably 8 to 10 on the top and bottom. So let's try that. And I think that looks pretty good, but I think the font size also needs to be decreased by a few pixels. So let's try doing a font size of maybe 14 pixels and kind of seeing how that looks. I think that looks a little better. And then also we want to do a border radius and we'll set 20 pixels to round the sides. And I think that's pretty good. And then we also just want to have some margin on the bottom here. So it looks like maybe that might be like 40 to 45 pixels. So let's try that out. We'll do a margin on the bottom and set it to like 40 pixels and we'll see how that looks. And I think that looks pretty good if we compare these two here. I think I'm happy with that. And we already had some margin on the bottom of our H1, but I do believe we have some margin on this paragraph tag we want to get rid of. So let's say thank you and then target our paragraph tag and set the margin on the bottom to 0. And I think that should be about it. So if we take a look at this and we compare the design here, I think we got that pretty close. Alright, so one last thing I do want to test out here is what happens if we don't actually make a selection and we click submit. So if we click submit, nothing happens. So I'm going to assume that we have an error. And yeah, we are getting an error here, and what's happening is it's actually trying to look at this variable right here of selected rating, and it's set to null initially, and since we're not actually setting anything when we submit it, it's trying to read that rating property on a variable that has no value, and it's just set to null, so it's going to throw an error. Now to fix this, what we can do is when we run this function to submit our form, we can actually just do an if check, and we can only set this to true if this value of selected rating is not equal to null. So what we can do is we can say if, and then we'll say selected rating dot value. If that's true, then we can set our form to be true itself. So now if we try and clear our console, if we submit this, then nothing should happen. And then if we actually make a selection and we hit submit, then it's still going to be able to submit. And really quickly, since we're here on mobile, one thing that we can fix, as you can see, the card right now on a small viewport is touching it up against the side of the screen. So to fix that, what we can do is just add some padding on the left and right. So we can do 0 and then maybe do like 16 pixels on the left and right. And that way it's not going to be touching the sides here on a very small screen. Alright, so that's going to wrap it up for this rating component. I think we did a pretty good job and got it pretty close, but let me know your thoughts or let me know if you would have done anything differently. If you do attempt to build this and you want to share the results with myself and other developers, I do have a Discord server that you can join, and I'll leave the link to that down below in the description. So anyways, thank you for watching. If you do want to see more videos like this, be sure to leave a like on it down below and subscribe if you are new, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.